Welcome to the interview here on France 24. I'm Philip Crowther in Washington, D.C. We'll be talking NATO today with the summit coming up in Chicago on the 20th and the 21st of May. Top of the agenda in Chicago will be the presence or the withdrawal of NATO troops from Afghanistan. Also on that agenda, European budget cuts in defence and what kind of an effect that might have on the NATO structure in the future. To talk about all of those subjects that will be part of the agenda in Chicago, I'm joined by General Stéphane Abrial, the highest-ranking French commander within NATO and the only French commander based here in the United States at NATO headquarters in Norfolk, in Virginia.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Let me start off with, well, we're at a crossroads in a sense, aren't we? Maybe within NATO, certainly in the relationships between France and the United States. With the election now over in France, a new president in waiting, François Hollande, one of his big campaign promises was to get all French troops out of Afghanistan by 2012. The NATO promise is a very different one, the US promise as well. Can I get just quickly your reaction to that campaign promise on behalf of the man who is now the French president?
Well, as a NATO commander, I can tell you that the NATO plan on Afghanistan is there to stay, and then it's up to each and every individual nation to make her own decisions on how they fit into the global campaign plan, including the transition. So NATO is just an alliance of sovereign nations, and NATO will accept the decisions of each nation wherever it goes.
This is presumably, though, something that will be discussed in detail in Chicago, won't it?
I guess so, yes.
Now let's talk a little bit further about the role of France within NATO. France got back into the command structure of the alliance only 3 years ago. Just can I get your reaction to how things have gone in these 3 years? It was certainly a radical change proposed by the former French president Nicolas Sarkozy. How have things gone for France within NATO in those 3 years?
I think that things have been going very well. I think that France has appreciated what our nation gets from the alliance, and the alliance has also appreciated the input from having the French inside the structure again. We could see it in many ways, the way we work on many important topics, from the strategic concept to the preparation for the Chicago summit, including our staff-to-staff work with the EU in order to improve the NATO-EU relationship.
And France certainly has a large role in Afghanistan, has had a large role in Afghanistan with the fifth largest number of troops based there. Still, there are different withdrawal plans, in theory at least, being worked on. The US plan is a different one after all. How do you see the war in Afghanistan ending now?
Well, the objective of the action in Afghanistan is to make sure that the Afghan government and the Afghan security forces can control and govern a safe and peaceful country. This is our main objective, and we'll do everything we can to get to this objective. And then, post-transition, post-2014, we'll continue in a strategic partnership with Afghanistan, seeing how we can help this country stay in a safe and stable environment.
Well, it's certainly been a very bloody conflict in Afghanistan for all troops involved, for NATO troops as well, of course. What are the main lessons learned from 10 years of conflict in Afghanistan?
Well, we're still drawing lessons from and identifying lessons from the conflict since it's not over. One of the main issues on which we've been working in my command is the fight against what we call the IEDs, the improvised explosive devices. What we could see in the previous years is that the opponents, not being able to take the upper hand again, have switched to a fight which was more based on planting these roadside bombs everywhere, killing more civilians, by the way, than military people. We have been in charge of organizing the fight against these roadside bombs, which means not only making sure that we defeat the devices themselves, but also the whole networks which make them possible. And this is something which we have learned the hard way, and we're continuing to work, because I'm suspecting that this kind of devices will be with us for years to come.
And presumably you'll be getting to some conclusions at the Chicago summit. It's been such a violent conflict with so many lives lost. Would you define it as a successful campaign on behalf of NATO? despite how bloody it was and indeed is?
I would say so. Again, if you look at the objective, I think that the result which we are planning and moving into is worth the effort. We very much appreciate the sacrifice which all the nations have made through the armed forces and all the losses there. But it's one more reason why we must continue and reach this objective.
Afghanistan was a very, very long conflict and of course still is. Let's look at a completely different operation on behalf of NATO. Let's look at Libya, a very short campaign. I'm sure you'd also define it as successful. Is this the way forward for NATO, this kind of an operation with not a single boot on the ground?
We must be very careful not to use the most recent operation as the model for the future. We will never fight the last war. So what we need to do is to identify what are the elements in each operation which are typical from this operation and which are the elements which are really lessons identified which we need to learn for future operations. The main one I would see at this stage, quite a few short time after the operation, is it was a strategic surprise. We need to be ready to be surprised again in the future, and therefore we need to be able to adapt to any possible situation. As you mentioned yourself, there's such a huge difference between the way the operation is conducted in Afghanistan and the way it was in Libya. We don't know what the next operation will look like, but we need to be able to adapt to any possible situation.
Was one of the positive aspects from Libya possibly the price of the operation? After all, we're looking at budget cuts all across the board within NATO member states right now. Is Libya in that way at least the way forward in terms of the price of such an operation?
Well, I would not qualify the success of an operation depending on its price. Every single operation needs to strike the right balance between the resources available and the objective you want to reach. Libya was short. Libya was successful with not that many means, and therefore the economy of scale, I would say, contributes to the success.
Well, speaking about the means of all the countries involved, budget cuts will be coming up possibly within all member states. Certainly the United States is looking at very serious budget cuts. How does NATO go forward with this? It is, after all, the defense budgets that are part of your budget.
We must make sure that when I say we as NATO collectively, we have the capabilities needed to fulfill the missions which are decided by our heads of state and government. Which means that we need to make sure that we can continue developing or maintaining those capabilities despite the current era of austerity. And this is the heart of the initiative which is called Smart Defense, which was launched by the Secretary General in the Munich Security Conference last year, and which will be one of the main agenda items in Chicago.
Is smart defense something that this term will come back during the Chicago summit repeatedly? Is it something that we've already seen in Afghanistan, possibly, or is this just something for the future?
It's something which we do not see directly in operations, because it's the way we prepare and develop the capabilities needed, which you are going to use afterwards in operation. Smart defense is basically the assessment that our budgets will, at the best, stay at the level they are now, or some of them will continue decreasing. And therefore, we need to make the best possible use of every euro, dollar, or pound our nations agree to spend on defense. And in order to make this, to improve its effectiveness, we need to work more together. And this is the heart of smart defense, which will be, again, at the center of a defense capability package in Chicago.
You say you have to work together with all member states of NATO. Something that does come up quite repeatedly is the possibility of maybe the right term is a European defence force outside of NATO. Is that something that NATO as an organisation, as an alliance, worries about? That the European Union might be looking a different way?
No, the vision is that the EU and NATO can be very complementary. They are mutually reinforcing institutions, not the same mandate, not the same membership. I think it's important to remember that 21 nations, soon to be 22, in Europe are members both of the EU and of NATO. And when a nation develops a capability, it can be made available to either EU or NATO. And therefore, reinforcing one is reinforcing both. And this is at the heart of our approach. We try to make sure that we don't only don't duplicate the work we do and capabilities with the EU, but we also bring it to a level of complementarity, which is very important for our nations.
Now, what about the United States? We've been talking a lot about this here in Washington, about serious defense budget cuts that are planned here in the US. That will have an impact on NATO, of course. What's your view of US defense going forward? Certainly things are changing and budgets are changing drastically.
I think that as every other country, the US itself also has to plan for cuts in the future defense budgets. My only comment is that it makes smart defense even more necessary, more useful in the future for all the nations across the Atlantic. The US is contributing heavily to smart defense, will contribute to a vast majority of projects which will be on the table in Chicago, which proves that smart defense is not only about improving European capabilities, but is valid on both sides of the Atlantic.
Any chance of a sneak peek of the kind of announcements that we might be able to expect from the summit?
Well, there will be a strong declaration on capabilities in the spirit of smart defense and launching this initiative with a very strong political momentum. We will have decisions on Afghanistan post-2014. We will have strong points also on partnerships and the importance of partners. NATO is not alone in the world, to the contrary, and working with partners, both nations and organizations, is important. And there will be the declaration of interim capability for the ballistic missile defense.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. Well, I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from you during the Chicago summit. General Abrial, thank you very much for being our guest. You were watching the France 24 interview. Make sure you do stay tuned for plenty more news coming up here on France 24.